This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Clean Cause. Do you need a healthier option for a quick boost? Grab a Clean Cause organic yerba mate and get your day going with 160 milligrams of better caffeine that won't cause crashes. It won't cause the jitters like coffee and some of the other energy drinks might do. You can choose from 8 flavors. You can try out the newly launched non-carbonated yerba mate. I don't know what it is too about the non-carbonated one. You need to get yourself like a fancy glass, maybe some ice in there, maybe like some mint leaves, and then you can pour in some of the Clean Cause organic non-carbonated yerba mate. It's a great one on a hot day. But here's the best part. Every sip makes a difference in the fight against addiction. So Clean Cause donates 50%. Yes, you heard that correctly. 50% of net profits to support individuals in recovery from drug and alcohol addiction. So not only do they taste great, but you get to help support those who are struggling out there. Grab a boost, live better, transform lives. Head on over to cleancause.com right now and get 20% off your order with promo code SOBERGUY. That's cleancause.com. Enter the promo code SOBERGUY at checkout and save 20%.
That Sober Guy podcast contains adult content, merciless truth, and emotional nudity. Listener discretion is advised.
I'm Shane Ramey. You're listening to That Sober Guy podcast, and we help people stay sober. If it's your first time listening, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here today. You can find more podcasts, more resources. You can also contact us by going to thatsoberguy.com. No goodbyes, just sneak to the Follow us on Instagram at That Sober Guy Podcast. All the links from today's episode will be in the show notes, so they're easy for you to find. Got a great guest for you today. His name is Michael Eon. And Michael earned a BA in psychology from the University of Michigan and a master's in international affairs from Columbia University. And he's a former board member of the Audio Publishers Association and a former producer of major motion pictures and television productions. Michael worked in the publishing and entertainment industries for more than 20 years and is originally from the New York area. Right now, currently residing in New Hampshire with his family. And he's about to release his first novel titled These Things Happen, which is due to be released here shortly next month in September. And we're going to talk a little bit about Mike's story, of course, the book that's coming out, and just hopefully encourage you guys today and give you guys a little motivation, a little hope through a great conversation and some sharing of our own experience. And Mike, dude, it's great to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much, man. Thanks for coming on.
Great to be here. Thanks for asking me, Shane.
Yeah, good stuff. So you're originally from New York, East Coast. I'm all the way on the West Coast. I always love to say, the beauty of technology allowing these conversations to take place and then throw out there in the world so someone else might hear them today. And I think what we'll do is maybe just give us a little background about yourself. Obviously, I gave a little bit in the intro, but tell us a little bit more about you, kind of where you're from, and then we'll dive into a little bit of your recovery story too.
Okay, sure. I'm originally from northern New Jersey, about 30 miles west of New York City. So, that area is very familiar to me. And I grew up with relatives, in New York and Brooklyn. And I've been living in New Hampshire now for about it's almost 20 years now. We moved up here just because I had to get out of the city. Yeah. I went to school at the University of Michigan and earned the psychology degree. And then I ended up starting a company which was a major seller of digital. It was one of the first companies, along with Audible, to be a seller of digital audio.
Got it.
And we had we went public, and we were doing like $65 million a year. And the fun of it kind of ran out for me because of the pressures of going public. And, we'll talk about it, but my drinking escalated, and then 9/11 happened, and that had a big impact on me. And it was about a year after that I stepped down from that, from running that company to get get my act together. Cause like I said, my drinking had spiraled out of control. So, I pretty much white knuckled it for a few years while I went back to school. And that's part of the reason why I decided to go into international affairs. And I actually specialized in, political violence and terrorism studies.
Really?
So but the thing is, after I got that degree, it was, the choices were to move down to Washington, DC, and kind of start at the bottom. And things were kind of chaotic in government at that time. And, I kind of just decided against it, and I started doing some consulting, and I was still consulting from my old job too. So that's when we decided to move the kids up here. What happened was I'm on the seacoast of New Hampshire, and when we moved up here in 2005, it was very much like it was in Morris County, New Jersey, when I grew up in the 70s. And I wanted that for the kids, and I wanted to get out of that rat race down there. And, I was completely burnt out. So that's what led me up here. And, I had a couple of relapses. In between all that, I started getting involved in production of film and television. So, I was able to work out of the house doing that and consulting and all kinds of other things. So, but all the while, trying to maintain my recovery and get to where I am today. So
one of the things that interested me when I had read some of your background and even a little bit about the book was your connection to the 70s, 80s, kind of metal and punk rock scene out there on the East Coast. And so I was hoping maybe, because I would guess that some of the alcohol, drugs probably was around that time as well. So I was wondering if maybe that's something you might want to share a little bit about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, when I was 14, I was probably, I think it was 13. My parents had redone, redone the house a bit where we were living, and they put in this kind of tiki bar in the basement, and they had one party, and they never went down there again, and it was stocked with liquor, and it had never occurred to me. But my household was fairly chaotic growing up. Yeah. It was kind of living in fear, and things like that had a big impact on me growing up, and my brothers. And what happened was, one day I was downstairs playing video games, and I think it was about 13, and I looked at those bottles like I'd done, for a year by that point. And for some reason I decided, hey, let me try it. And that I was alone. And, basically, it was the greatest feeling that I'd ever felt, because I was very much a kid in my own head. I had friends or whatever, but I always felt kind of alone. And music was my saving grace. My older brother was into all kinds of what's now classic rock at the time, and so that's where I got exposed to a lot of it. And so at that point, between listening to music for escape and discovering the alcohol, I was on my way. Yeah. And I ended up depleting, all those bottles, filling the light liquids with water, and the dark liquids with flat soda, Coke or whatever. And over the course of, 3 years, I pretty much emptied that thing out. And then I discovered marijuana. And so all the while there was music around, and they were always, living where I lived, there were shows I was going to. I saw, Van Halen at the Garden in '81, and Rainbow Scorpions. I saw Metallica on their first club tour in New Jersey and New York. I bought, I had Kill 'Em All and everybody. I was always looking. Everything for me led to anger and aggression. I didn't get anxious and worrisome and cower in a corner. I was very angry, and I would take and that heavy music really made a huge impact on me because, at the time, Black Sabbath, Judas Priest, and Iron Maiden, I needed something heavier. And that's in 82, 83 when Metallica came along and Slayer and Exodus and Anthrax and all those bands. So that was a huge part of my story because I was going to shows all the time. I was drinking, I was smoking pot, I got into cocaine. And, between drugs and music, that was my escape. That was my freedom.
Yeah. I so much relate to you on that. I think that's probably why it interested me when I had saw that in your background as well. Similar, I can remember being 14 maybe and going out, and I don't remember what I was upset about, but it was definitely kind of like you described to it at my own house. I always described it as kind of controlled chaos though. Like it was chaotic, but dad was in control all the time, and or at least he, tried to be. And, but I can remember going out and seeing a tequila bottle there. And I said, I'm just going to, and there was a little shot glass there. I said, I'm just going to take a couple of those. And I remember shooting 2 of them back to back. And I didn't know what really, I was like, okay. And then just feeling that warmth and that warm feeling of not having to feel anymore. And then you couple that. So for me, it was like early 90s, and mid 90s punk rock and that East Bay punk rock out here in San Francisco and Berkeley and even up in Sacramento. And there's some friends of mine in a band called Papa Roach that are from my hometown here. And so those were those small little community center shows, being 14, 15, trying to escape home and going to these shows. And just like you described, Mike, like getting all that animosity, that energy, that anger. Like I remember my buddy Ray, he was like, the first one I went to where there was a big mosh pit, and he goes, man, you just got to let loose. You just got to let go. And so I said, okay. And then I let go. And it was like the first time I just was just raging in there, having so much fun, but like getting it all out. And I just thought about that too. That was the first time in my life that I let go. And I'll equate that to letting go of alcohol and letting go in my own, recovery stuff too. I know that was wanted to share a little bit there, but did you experience that too? Did you feel that letting go, just being able to just like let it all out and at those shows and then have fun too, of course?
Yeah, exactly. Because, like similar to you, I mean, it was a controlled chaos and he had all the control, my father, and it was like, even today, I think about how all my life, because I had no control growing up in that house, I had no control at all. That all my life I was trying to get control, and that's where all these behaviors came about that I had to struggle with in sobriety when I no longer had a drink or drug to kill the pain and numb me. That I had to deal with all that because I had no tools. No one taught me any. I mean, I learned everything on my own, and everything I learned was wrong. And for example, I'm 6 years old, and my father's working on something in the garage, and he asks me he says, get a Phillips head screwdriver. Right. And I'm 6 years old. I don't know what a Phillips head, but I'm definitely afraid to ask what a Phillips head is because you couldn't ask questions. You had to know answers without knowing. So, of course, I bring a flathead and I get screamed at, and it's like, and so that's the environment. Yeah. So it's like
you're constantly on edge.
Yeah, constantly on edge, constantly not knowing, what's going to happen. Constantly, mistakes were not just they were a betrayal. It was like, how could you, and it was like, how could you expect a 6-year-old to know? But whatever, I've gotten past all that, thank God, today. Yeah. But that was a huge part of my of my anger and hatred, and that's where the music and the drugs and alcohol came in, because I could totally let go. I could totally be me, be the person I wanted to be, and and it just all took me away. And I mean, I needed it. I absolutely needed it to survive.
Do you still go to any shows or anything? Like revisit some of those old school, little clubs or shows?
Yeah, once in a while. I mean, with my kids, I tried to, as they were growing up, I tried to take them to the artists that were going to be, getting older and phasing out, like, Arlo Guthrie. We saw them a few times. We saw him a few times, which I love. He was fantastic. And Roger Waters, David Gilmour, the Eagles, all those kinds of bands. In terms of the heavier stuff, it's been a while. I mean, I started, I was, when Kiss put their makeup back on in '96, I saw them because that was one of my big regrets growing up, was I never got to see them with the makeup. So when they put it back on in '96, I saw 3 shows in New York. I saw 2 shows in Jersey. I saw 2 shows in Orlando and 3 shows in Miami, So, I mean, that kind of stuff, but that was, but it's been since then, I saw Cheap Trick at a club. Cheap Trick was actually my first concert in, I think, '79 at the Capitol Theater in Passaic. And actually that had an impact on me too, because my older cousin had took me, and I remember going to the bathroom and there was a guy shooting heroin, and I was 12 at the time. And I was so curious because it was like he melted down the wall as he was shooting it and fell to the floor. And I remember just being mesmerized by it until my cousin pulled me out with my eye, with his hand over my eyes, But wow. So I was always exposed to that stuff, and it always went hand in hand with the shows and stuff. So getting sober and getting older, kind of took me out of, even though all those bands, the guys in those bands these days, Metallica and everyone, they're sober too, But it's hard. It's hard because when you equate that part of your life to being that way all the time, with those bands, and then
it's hard to revisit it. It's hard. It does bring up some things, at least for me. And also too, I just think, like you mentioned, just being older and kids, and like my wife and I, we went to just a couple weekends ago. We love reggae. So there's a Lake Tahoe Reggae Fest up here at Olympic Valley. And so we went, and we just, we were walking around. It's festival day. So there's this festival people, and there's the whole vibe's going on. It was cool. The music was great. Everyone was happy and stuff, but it was just different seeing everyone, drinking and smoking weed. Obviously lots of weed at a reggae festival. Right. And then there's not a lot of chairs either, because you just bring a blanket, and my wife and I are like, man, we need a chair. So we literally walked around for 20 minutes trying to find a damn chair, and sat down, and we ended up having a good time, for the most part. It was more just spending time together and seeing some friends, and Stick Figure was awesome. But it's just my priorities and my love for things are a lot different than they are, or than they were back then. And even I took my son, the first show he went to was Madball. I took him to see Madball and Old Firm Casuals up here at a Elks Club, and that was fun too. It was a few years ago, but it's just, like I said, it's just different. It's not the same. What eventually, let me back up. Take us to where, that point of desperation comes in, that point of change. Where were you at? What was your lifestyle like? And then what was that moment that kind of shifted for you, and you decided to take a different path?
Yeah, it's really been it's been a long journey, because it was in 2002, in October of 2002, after 9/11 and everything spiraled, my drinking was out of control, that I stepped down from that job, which had burnt me out anyway. And that's the first time I admitted to myself and to someone else that I was an alcoholic. I had been able to, my biggest struggles prior to that were with cocaine and marijuana. And I had, quote, beaten them kind of on my own. And I always knew that I'd have alcohol. So it was never like a panic situation because alcohol was going to be there, even if it wasn't my first choice. It was always around and it was always going to be there. Then I was left only with alcohol as I had kids and I said, I can't do that stuff, and I always knew that I was different. I always knew that I had the allergy, the physical allergy. Once I start, I cannot stop. And, that mental obsession, always thinking about it when I'm not doing it. Yeah. But it was like October 2002, it was October 19th. And it was the first time I admitted I was an alcoholic and a drug addict. And I tried out AA and, tried. I went to some AA meetings in Jersey and it was like, everything in my body and mind was telling me, you are not like them. You don't belong there, blah, blah, blah. Everything, your mind tells you when you're in denial, of your situation and you're rationalizing and justifying and everything else. So like I said earlier, I white knuckled it, just smoking cigarettes basically for a couple of years while I went back to school, which kept me very busy. So that was good. But then I moved up here in 2005 to New Hampshire. And what happened was I was sitting in the backyard. We just moved up. I was sitting in the backyard. It was beautiful. I thought I had left all my problems behind, the geographic cure type deal. And I said, you know what? I mean, literally this wall that I had built up between myself and the drink, which was massive, had crumbled in an instant. And I had no defense. I had no defense against that. And I started drinking again. And I went on basically, what was it at the time? Probably like a 3.5-year binge of drinking out of control until I hit another moment of despair like I had in October of 2002. This was in October of 2009. And again, it was, I knew I was an alcoholic. I knew when I drank in 2006, I couldn't do it. I shouldn't do it, but I did it. And it was nonstop. And so I ended up going back to AA because it was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm either going to drink myself to death or I'm not going to go to rehab. Something bad's going to happen. I got, AA was like the only option. And I went to a meeting here, a 7 a.m. meeting on a Monday morning. And that's where it all started for me, the recovery. And for some reason I kept going back. And I remember sitting in that chair early on being like, oh my God, I mean, paralyzed by the thought that you're telling me I can never have another drink again for the rest of my life. And you're also telling me I got to go to these meetings for the rest of my life. It's like I'm paralyzed. Yeah. I'm paralyzed sitting there. But then someone said something about one day at a time. And I'll tell you, it sounds cliche, but that made all the difference for me. Because then it was like, I can do an hour. I can do a few hours. I can do a day, and not worry about tomorrow and not worry about yesterday. And that was a huge help. So I just kept going and I would feel a little better. And I had that pink cloud. But I wasn't doing the step work. I was like, I thought I'd go in there and I think I have no fear. I'm riddled with fear. If I'm being honest with myself, riddled. I mean, every defect of character that I have is driven by some kind of fear. Yeah. And I remember this guy says, and I'm like a year and a half, 2 years in, and I'm basically stark raving sober. I'm basically like out of my head in sobriety, causing more damage with the people around me and the people I love than I had been when I was drinking and drugging, where I was just, I would be comatose or passed out or not present. But now I have nothing to kill that anger and animosity and everything inside of me. And some guy says, the real definition of it, I was at a meeting and he goes, the real definition of insanity is joining a 12-step program and not doing the 12 steps. And that hit me like a ton of bricks, And this was the guy who I couldn't stand whenever he spoke at the meeting when I first got there, but I ended up loving everything he was saying by that time. So I finally asked him if he would take me through the steps, and he was like, "I thought you'd never ask." So that's where it all began, when I went through the steps, and that was life-changing for me.
Yeah.
I ended up getting to a place by 2015 where I was going to meetings all the time. I was speaking at meetings all the time. I had commitments all over the place. I was living, the principles, truly living the principles, between that self-discovery and that higher power component, everything was working for me. And then I moved down to Florida. I don't know why, for some unknown reason. My daughter went to school down there, and my parents were down there, and it was kind of like, okay. Anyway, things fell apart there because I got, I'm just going to tell you this piece because it's a big part of my story. I was in the best place I could have been spiritually and sobriety wise when we moved down there. But by 2018, I had stopped going to meetings for whatever reason. It was different. I don't know. I can give you all kinds of excuses, but it's all bull because the fact was I wasn't in my comfort zone anymore, and things kind of fell apart. And then I got injured, and I went on painkillers, and I rode that train for a little while, and then I had to get off that train. So I said, okay, maybe medicinal marijuana, right? Medicinal marijuana. And I knew I couldn't smoke. And at that point, you could get marijuana where it was now like 80% THC content. It was like numb the brain stuff. And so I had to get off that train. And then I drank again. And I remember sitting there I bought a bottle of whiskey and I drank again. So I'd already broken my sobriety, but it was like so I went on a 1 month binge. My wife would tell you 0 to 1 million. I mean, it was like that progression happened so fast and so quick and so bad that it was like, anyway, I dragged myself into a meeting and started back up in 2019. So I got another 4 years. So instead of having 14 years now, I had the relapse. So I got 4 years. But I was able to pick back up right where I left off.
Yeah, they say that a lot, right? You pick up right where you left off. I hear that so often. Guys who have 5, 10, 15, 20 years and think maybe, I might be able to have a few drinks, and then it's just boom. Like you said, 0 to 1 million in no time.
Yeah. And I mean, and the thing was, I had no defense. When I relapsed again, it was because, I had there's a line in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which says, we are not cured of alcoholism. What we really have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. And for me, that's the truth. Because I need the fellowship. I need, my tendency is to isolate and both physically and mentally, and to just be, not self-centered in the sense of like being mean or whatever, but or selfish being mean, but like self-absorbed, just concerned about myself constantly. And my way of breaking out of that and trying to be among other people and be useful to other people is by using those 12 steps. Yeah. And 10, 11, and 12, which I honestly try to work to the best of my ability and willingness, on a daily basis, trying to limit the new wreckage I create, and trying to keep that contact with a power greater than myself. For me, it all boils down to, Mike, don't interject yourself. Okay. Don't try to control things. Let the universe unfold, there's, the saying, thy will, not mine be done. I mean, to me, that's a spiritual phrase, in the sense that it's like, whatever it is, I can't define it. God, the universe, the light, the source, the creator, whatever you want to call it. Let that go. Let that be what it's, let it unfold. Don't kill yourself with worrying about things that may or may not have, it's like that whole idea of letting things, surrendering to the moment, because I found that in surrender, there's power. I'm in a much better place, sanity wise, serenity wise, when I live that way,
Yeah, 100. Yeah, actually, when you were saying that, I brought up step 11. I mean, that's one of my favorite ones too. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him. Praying only for knowledge. I love this part too. Praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. So, I mean, for me, that really just, opens up kind of what you're talking about, letting go of self, getting out of self, in service too. I know I'm going to ask, I guess I would ask you this, like being of service, helping other people, does that help you get out of your own mind and out of your own self, like a lot?
Absolutely. I mean, it's like, the one thing I tell people that I sponsor, or just anybody, that's the thing about the 12 steps is I think all human beings to a certain extent, are emotionally ill or spiritually ill or, what have you. And I think these steps can apply to not just addicts and alcoholics, but pretty much anyone. But yeah, I mean, I tell people, when I'm helping someone else, I'm getting, or being useful to someone else, I'm getting out of myself.
Yeah.
My quote self. I'm getting out of my own head. I'm getting out of my own way. It's extremely therapeutic. Just like talking to another addict or alcoholic about, identifying, and telling a story about your experiences and being able to identify with what they say, that kind of thing. These ideas of hope and that you're not the only one going through it, and that be useful. You can rejoin society and be a useful human being, and actually it will pay off for you instead of just thinking about yourself and your needs and your wants. I mean, honestly, the best way I can put it is, for all my life, I tried to fit the world into me, as opposed to fitting myself into the world as it is. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. This whole idea of living life on life's terms. It was my terms. Growing up, like when I first got there, I didn't know what this. I could not identify or understand the Serenity Prayer, because it was like I grew up in a world where it was like, there's nothing you can't change except for a war in a distant land and the weather. You could change anything. It was like, if we're driving to a Giants game, my dad is driving down the emergency lane, and us kids are in the back going, yeah, this is awesome, and if you got stopped, you got a ticket, great. But we weren't those suckers sitting in that traffic for 10 miles, and that's the state of mind and mind frame that I had grown up. And that's sick. That's a twisted mind frame, because then you start applying that to everything else in your life, and you start stepping on everybody's toes and causing angst between, total inability to have a personal relationship with someone else because of those kinds of mindsets.
Yeah, totally. You're constantly trying to get a leg up, constantly trying to get, how can I manipulate this situation to get what I want or what I need or where we need to be on time or early or whatever. We got about, I'm just doing a quick time check here. We got about 10, 12 minutes left. I wanted to hear a little bit about, what it's like now, and then we'll get into the book too, because I want to be sure that you can tell us a little bit about that work and where we can find it, all that good stuff. But one question first before we do that. You mentioned fear quite, a couple times, as did I, and just sharing a little bit about our experience and stuff, and kind of that controlled chaos. And so for somebody who's maybe had a similar experience with that, maybe growing up, maybe they've developed some issues with alcohol, with other substances, and they know that like you said too, you knew that you had an issue, like you knew there was a problem there, but it's knowing it and actually taking action and getting some help and making that step into a meeting or making a phone call or whatever it is that you got to do is really difficult sometimes. So what would you say to someone out there who might be kicking that idea around? Like, they're like, man, I know I need some help, but I don't really know how to get over this fear. I'm scared to death to go into a meeting. Like, what kind of advice or what would you share with them, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I know for me, I have a healthy respect for the power of my mind, which I guess I equate with ego in a lot of ways. Because I remember, I thought I was in such a good place before I'd done the steps, before I finally asked that guy to take me through the steps. And I remember I got into the biggest fight I'd ever gotten into with my wife. And I'm like, I thought I was doing good. And she's like, are you kidding me? You are as bad as you've ever been. And you're not drinking or doing anything. And it was like a wake up call. So, I mean, my mind is not telling me what's reality, what the truth is. And that's where, that unmanageability and insanity piece comes in, because you think you're in a good place. You think, but you're not. Your mind is telling you one thing, and the truth and the reality is another. And it's hard if you don't have someone around you honest enough to be able to tell you that. But if you have a problem and you got to do something about it. I mean, I don't know about other people, but like one of the things that I grew up with, and one of the ideas that drove my life, was that it was a total weakness to rely on anybody else, let alone some bearded czar in the sky, and overcoming that was a huge thing. That idea, and the idea that if there's something that I really don't want to do out of fear, or even if I'm not fearing because I'm in denial about it, even though I really am fearing, but I'm not, my mind's telling me, oh, it's not fear. It's giving me like 10 other excuses, forcing myself to do things that I don't want to do. I like so many times I'll sponsor other men and they're like, they don't want to do something, or they don't want to go. I say, when you don't want to go to a meeting, that's when you need a meeting most. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's like it's hard, because it's almost like, for me, because I can only really talk about my experience, I had to have that gift of desperation. I had to be in such despair and such such hopelessness and despair to get motivated. And the same thing happened to me in sobriety. It had to get bad enough in sobriety, kind of like hitting an emotional rock bottom, before I said, okay, I got to do the steps, or I'm going to go back out and drink,
Yeah.
Like, that's what motivated me. So, it's hard, because it's like, if sometimes, people don't want to, if they haven't hit that bottom, so to speak, I don't know how they could get the motivation to do what they really need to do,
Yeah.
I mean, and that's why the book, and, like, I'm not advocating go back out and test the waters again if you're not convinced,
Yeah.
But it's like, sometimes that's honestly what needs to happen before you get to that point of desperation where it's like, okay, I'm going to do it. And that outweighs the fear of
pure desperation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good, man. Thanks for sharing that. So what is it like today for you? I know you have a family. Obviously, you just written a book. You're working. It sounds like a lot of great stuff going on. You're overcoming being sick. I know you were sick for a minute there. We were trying to do this interview for a minute, but tell us a little bit about what it's like today.
Yeah, I mean, it was about 10 years ago when I asked this guy to sponsor me and take me through the steps, and we went through the steps in a very literal way, and I did a lot of writing in the fourth step, and as an offshoot of that writing, of all those resentments, and what my part was, and what the fears were that were driving it. Out of that came this, I don't know, I just started journaling, I just started writing these small episodic stories about these childhood memories that those kinds of things that never went away. Like my memory is not great and I can't remember a lot. I mean, kids, friends that I know from back then or family members, whatever, they'll bring things up and I'll be like, oh my God, I didn't remember. I totally had no memory of that. But there are certain things that I do remember, and I did remember, like the screwdriver thing, for example. Yeah. So it's like I started writing these kind of stories out of that. It kind of grew out of that fourth step, resentment list. And it just kind of evolved into this creative writing thing. And I remember showing some of that stuff to my wife, and she was like, wow, this is really good. And so anyway, it's probably been like 9 years since I started to just tool around with the idea of writing a book. And that I knew a memoir could not be possible for obvious reasons. And I wouldn't want that anyway, whether those people were alive or not. So I decided to do it as a novel, but I also wanted to bring in this whole recovery piece and spiritual piece, because, I think that there's a lot of, it's like, so I don't know the word for it, but like you see recovery stuff sometimes in film and television, but it's either inaccurate or it just touches the surface. There's nothing that's really out there except for a memoir, an addict's memoir. Like, Augustine Burroughs has some memoirs and Mary Carr, lit, those things which are powerful, but nothing really in the way of fiction or a novel. Yeah. And so that's what I figured, let me do that. And so I started working on that a long time ago, and it kind of evolved into something fairly different from what it started as. But I spent a lot of time on that. I continue to go to meetings, every day. In the morning, I'll do in person. At night, I'll do Zoom usually. I work with a lot of other people. My mission is, after my sponsor took me through the steps, I remember walking out after I read my fifth step, and I was like, I can't believe you spent all this time with me, all these hours. Like, it's like so foreign to me that someone would give of themselves in that way. And I was like, I don't know how I could ever repay you. And he just looked at me and he said, Mike, just pay it forward, and honestly, there's that saying, again, cliche, but it's like, to keep it, I got to give it away. And that's a huge part of how I live today. And I'll tell you, when I got better, the only thing in the household and among my relationships in business and other family, the only variable that changed was me. Everything else got better. All those relationships got better when I got better, when I stopped, being, driven by resentment and fear and all of those things that really, destroy a person. So yeah, life is good today.
That's awesome.
And I'm just grateful for the program. I'm a huge proponent of it. Some people say Alcoholics Anonymous doesn't have a great track record, doesn't work. My opinion is that it works fine. You have to work. You have to work. You have to work it. You have to do what's required. I remember when I first got into meetings and people would say, just don't drink and go to meetings. And that was great until it wasn't, until it stopped working. I needed more than that. And that's where the steps come in. But I know today that I can't just have God in my pocket and a big book, under my arm. I need the fellowship. I need to go to meetings. I need to be around other people, because I know that if I'm not doing all of these pieces, that a relapse is potentially in my future again, and I don't want to go back there because I might not make it back the next time. Yeah, so,
I wanted to show a copy of the book, These Things Happen. So thanks for sending this over, man. I greatly appreciate it. What's the biggest takeaway for folks who pick up the book? What do you think's one or two things that they would really take away from reading the book?
I mean, I think they'll identify with a great deal of, and it's not just for alcoholics and addicts. I mean, it's a story. I mean, so many people's lives are touched, even if they're not the addict or the alcoholic. So many people's lives are touched by this. And I think that they'll identify with the struggles of the characters. I think that they'll identify with this idea that people, everybody has problems. It's like for so long I was in denial about the fact that my father had his own childhood, his own upbringing, his own, God knows what happened to him, and some people, it's just, some people get to a point where they have no choice but to change, and other people get away with the way they are and whatever. And, it's just everybody, you have to accept it. You have to, my wife always used to say, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? I think she got it from Dr. Phil, and it's like, so it's like so true. It's like so true. The same with, what was I going to say? I can't remember, but anyway, they'll identify with the the active alcoholism addiction piece, and they'll find a lot of good stuff in the evolution into recovery and becoming more spiritually fit and struggling with the idea of God or a higher power. And it's my hope is that I'm not doing it for financial reasons, honestly. I mean, I just want my mission today is to help. To be useful and to be helpful to others, especially those struggling with alcohol and drugs and any kind of addiction, really. So I think it's a good read. I think it's an enjoyable read. I think it's identifiable, and I think there's a lot of good, useful tools and tips to take away.
Well, it's going to be out here soon. Where's the best place folks could find it? Can they go put a pre-order in if they want, or where would you direct them?
It's released on September. It's going to be released on September 19th. You can go to Amazon, Barnes and Noble, pretty much wherever books are sold online, and pre-order it.
Awesome. Well, and we'll be sure. For those listening, there'll be links for that. I already have the Amazon link in the show notes here, so it's easy to find for you. Mike, hey, thanks so much, man, for taking time with us, coming on, sharing your story, and sharing a bit about the book, man. I appreciate you. It's been really great to meet you too.
Great to meet you, Shane. Thanks for having me.
I hope something spoke to you today. Share the podcast with a friend. You can connect with us on Instagram at That Sober Guy Podcast. Be sure to check out Mike's book, These Things Happen. Once again, all those links will be in the show notes for you. Peace, love, and respect, and keep your blood clean. You're the